Now, time for Health Matters, and taking proactive steps towards protecting one's health and reducing the risk of conditions such as hypertension, stroke and heart disease could begin with a diet with a low salt intake. Now, the World Health Organization recommends 5 grams of daily salt intake, which is the equivalent of 1 teaspoon in an effort to protect one's health. Now, on Health Matters this morning, we're focusing on the role played by sodium in our bodies and the fact that too much of it could lead to long-term health conditions. So to help us discuss this, we joined virtually now by Professor Pamela Naidoo, who's the Chief Executive Officer of the Heart and Stroke Foundation, South Africa. Professor Naidoo, thanks so much for your time and welcome to Morning Live.
A very good morning, Sakina. It's lovely to be on the show. Morning to the viewers as well.
We certainly appreciate your time, Professor Naidoo. So how much salt is too much on a daily basis?
Yes, that's a great question. The problem with the recommendation of 5 grams of salt per day is that it's very difficult for us as individuals to actually have some good estimate of what is 5 grams. Perhaps one good way of doing this is to remember that food naturally has salt in it. So any food, even prepared food, obviously has salt in it, but natural raw foods also have sodium, which is the chemical name for salt. So if you realize that there's already salt in your food, when you're preparing your food, you just add very little salt, literally a pinch of salt during the cooking process, and don't have salt at the table. So there's no need really to add that additional salt. That's one way of, trying to self-manage what is that 5 grams per day.
And when we speak about salt, Professor Naidoo, we these days often told there's something called healthy salts, natural salts like the Himalayan pink salts and, the sea salt and others that we find in supermarkets. And these are passed off as healthy salts. Is that correct? Are those natural salts, and what's the difference?
Yes, so it is not true. I think that if you look at marketing and the way companies market products, it's why we buy certain products and we don't buy others. Also remember, we are, human beings, so we're visual, we like aesthetically pleasing things that look nice. And so the Himalayan salt, for example, it looks really pretty, but it actually has the same sodium content. So don't be fooled by the marketing, strategies that companies use to make you think that it's better salt than others. However, having said that, there is a drive around the world in, countries that can afford it at this point to reduce sodium and salt. Okay, and if that is on the label, then you can hold that particular company accountable if they are saying there's less sodium. And then if they're saying it's potassium enriched and they reduce the sodium and add the potassium, then that's another good way to realize, okay, so this particular company is making the effort. However, they can be legally sued if they're using it as a marketing strategy.
And speaking of, Professor Naidoo, salt awareness campaigns, do you feel that those are reaching the public in any meaningful way? Have you seen, as a result of these, people taking control of their salt intake?
Yes, that's such an important question. I can use South Africa as a case study. We have lobbied for many years to reduce the salt in manufactured foods. And we did actually have a win. So there's a very strong salt legislation that we have in South Africa. It's one of the leading ones in the world, because at that time we saw, this was about 15 years ago or more, we did see that the hypertension levels in South Africa were way too high. So about 9 years ago, we did have, not just the sugar reduction, so the sugar sweetened beverage tax, but we also had some enhancements to salt reduction. I think the lesson is that there are multi-pronged ways in which we can ensure that people reduce salt intake. In South Africa, this multi-pronged strategy has worked. So we've had salt reduction legislation, we have major campaigns, and we have over time, and this is evidence-based because we've collected the data, various academics have, we've seen a reduction in salt intake from 8.5 grams of salt to about 7.5 grams of salt. So it won't happen dramatically and magically, but it's definitely happening over time.
And what happens to our bodies, Professor Naidoo, when we do consume too much salt? Are there any visible symptoms that one can look out for?
Yes, so it's the heart and the brain, and of course your kidneys as well, because your kidneys flush out toxins. Now, if you have excessive salt intake, what happens is you then absorb a lot more liquid, which puts pressure onto the circulatory system. And if you have more volume in your bloodstream, it's going to put more pressure on the heart. So, that would be, and then of course, if there's pressure on the heart and the brain are not unrelated. So the body finds it difficult to get rid of the excess in your body, which puts pressure on all your organs actually.
And is there such a thing as consuming too little salt, Professor Naidoo? And if so, how does the body present then?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So I think a lot depends on your day-to-day activity levels. So you'll see, for example, extreme sports people or athletes who require salt, obviously, for good muscle functioning and so on. But so remember your high blood pressure or low blood pressure can also have a genetic component. So if you know your family history, that's one way of managing your health. In my family, for example, I've inherited my mom's low blood pressure. And my physician always tells me, that's great for your health, because it protects your heart. However, I do get tired, so when you know that, you learn how to manage it and you eat maybe a healthy snack. I wouldn't really recommend raising your salt intake per se. What I do recommend, if you have ill health, if you're an extreme sports person, you should consult a dietitian and a physician who can then guide you as to the correct way to increase your salt intake.
And just finally, Professor Naidoo, for people who need to start, who are taking in too much salt on a daily basis, what's the best way to go about that?
I would say the best way is to be mindful. So just a very quick couple of takeaways. I think fast foods are culprits. Absolutely try and stay away from fast food. Some restaurants have been really good at heating alcohol. We've asked for them to take the salt shaker off the tables. We should be doing that at home as well. And what we could also do when we're cooking food is I use my grandmother's method, and that is I just pinch a little bit of salt, and that's all I use in my pot of food. And then I use herbs and spices. We are blessed with lots of wonderful fresh fruit and vegetables in our country. So let's utilize, and we're multicultural. So we've learned from each other's cultures about spices, and let's use our wonderful heritage to make our food tastier.
Yeah, and thank you so much for your time this morning, Professor Pamela Naidoo. Take those shakers off the table, because I know some of us probably put the salt on before we even taste, but stop that. Leanne just put her hand up. I also do that, Leanne. But that was Professor Pamela Naidoo, Chief Executive Officer of the Heart and Stroke Foundation, South Africa, talking to us about the impact of consuming too much salt and how it could be a health risk for conditions such as hypertension, stroke and heart disease, and of course other circulatory conditions.